And this is the question that fleets have been grappling with for the past, at least a decade, right? Is it just going to be cleaner diesel? Is it going to be natural gas? Is it hydrogen? Is it battery electric? We don't really know, right? I think the cool thing about electrifying the trailer is that it's a modular solution, right? And it's a modular solution, and trailers sit around a lot more frequently than tractors, and so you can actually charge them a lot more easily because there's more dwell time, so you can actually take use of opportunity charging. So there may be a case where maybe we do sort of lop off the long range fuel types on the tractor side. And if you want to go long range, you just hitch it up to an electrified trailer. What I do know is that there needs to be more tools than there are today to allow fleets to electrify their operations or decarbonize their operations in a way that works for them.
Hardware to Save a Planet explores the technical innovations that are giving us hope in the fight against climate change. Each episode focuses on a specific climate challenge and explores an emerging physical technology solution with the person bringing it into reality. I'm your host, Dylan Garrett. Hardware to Save a Planet is brought to you by Synapse. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Thanks for listening. Hello and welcome to Hardware to Save a Planet. I'm here today with Jason Chua, the Chief Product Officer at Range Energy. Jason and his team are on a mission to accelerate electrification of the trucking industry, which is important because road freight is responsible for something like 5% of global emissions. They've developed a kit that can be installed on existing semi-truck trailers that includes a battery, motor, and sensor suite. This increases fuel economy for the truck and reduces emissions by 70%. We have over 3 million Class 8 diesel semi-trucks on the road today. We're making 250,000 new ones every year. So having a solution that works to decarbonize existing trucks rather than waiting to turn over the whole fleet feels like a really smart move to me. I'm excited to learn more about this from Jason. To introduce him quickly, he is no stranger to sustainable transportation. Prior to Range, he co-founded Universal Hydrogen, a startup with an ambitious plan to decarbonize aviation with hydrogen-powered planes and a novel hydrogen distribution system. Before that, he worked on a hybrid electric airplane for United Technologies and an incubator for Airbus. Prior to his time in aerospace, he worked on a number of consumer and healthcare technologies, including Google's Project Ara, which stood out to me because it was this really cool modular phone concept back in, I want to say, 2015 or so. Jason, it's really awesome to have you. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
So it was fun to kind of scroll through your work history. You've been involved in a lot of really cool projects. I was curious, what's been driving you throughout your career? And is there like a common thread, or has it changed over time? Because it's a pretty fun like variety of things.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's a funny question. I ask myself that question every day. I feel very lucky to have been able to work on a lot of really interesting things with some really great people. I like a lot of different things. I'm curious about a lot of different topics. And so I think you kind of, I don't think that, or at least I haven't found anything I've worked on to be boring. They're all kind of new and innovative and different in some way. And I think that's one thing that certainly drives me. Certainly especially the past few years, right? I think that curiosity has kind of given a little bit of way of like, okay, well, a lot of things are cool, but are these things also impactful? Can I create impact with the work that I do? And so I think it's always great to be able to work with great people on important problems in a way that I feel like it can provide some unique value to. And so those are kind of the three things I look for when I think about, well, what do I want to do next? Or is what I'm doing like the right thing for me to be doing? And I've been really fortunate that I've found a number of interesting places where those three things have aligned.
And it seems like, yeah, to your point kind of recently about making an impact, you had this thread going of aviation, sustainable aviation, at least from the outside, that's the way it looks. And you've kind of moved to the ground now. I'm curious about that move. Like, does coming to wheeled vehicles on the ground, change the approach, make, is it an easier problem to solve? Is it a nearer term impact you can have, or like what was that move about for you?
It's kind of funny. In a way, it's almost like coming full circle because it's little known fact about me is back when I was working at Google on Project Ara, One of the things I did was I was on on the road for 6, 7 months, just on a road trip in a Velcro covered Sprinter van, just trying to understand what was going on in the hardware hacking and smartphone market. And so, in a way, you could say that this is just me coming back full circle, and it's a slightly bigger vehicle that's on the ground. But in all seriousness, right? I think that aviation's amazing, right? It's really inspiring, and it's literally the sky is not even the limit with aviation and aerospace. But to just use another another pun, right? This is ground transportation's where the rubber meets the road, right? There's a lot of things that happen on the ground, and I think it's really important and I think you hit it on the head in the introduction, right? This is a sector that is responsible for a pretty significant amount of carbon emissions, and there aren't a lot of practical solutions that are out there, right? So I think there's a great opportunity here, as there is in aerospace, to try to come up with new technologies that the industry can actually adopt, so we can actually make a difference and kind of bend that curve a bit.
Yeah, 5% of total emissions, 2 billion tons of CO2 was something I read. And to your point, it doesn't feel like we have a lot of solutions. It feels like there's a lot of ways we could tackle this. I mean, alternative fuels, electrified trucks. We actually did an episode with Remora. Do you know them? Doing
Yeah.
onboard
Mhm.
carbon capture, shifting more to rail transport. Something like that. I'm curious, like, why has this been such a hard problem to really take a meaningful bite out of to date?
Yeah, it's an industry it's really good at what it does. It's really efficient, but I think that also means that the margins are kind of thin, right? Because it's part of a larger ecosystem, a larger supply chain, and so it's not a wash in cash, right? It's not tech AI data centers where there's some money that's sloshing around, and you can try lots of weird things. You got to try things that are actually practical, that fit with how people work today. And so I think in the past, right, that's included things that you've mentioned, right? Electrifying powertrains, aerodynamic improvements, things that are more incremental. Modal shifts is another thing that you talked about, right? But a lot of these things they take a long time, right? They take a long time to, if you were going to replace all powertrains from diesel to electric. First of all, there's infrastructural challenges, but also the technology insertion cycle in these industries is kind of slow, right? They're not going to throw out a tractor that's perfectly fine that has another 10 years of life on it, right? They can't afford to do that, right? So they take longer, it's more incremental. And so we wanted to take a look at ways that we could actually have a drop-in solution that fits today with the infrastructure and operations and businesses as they run today, rather than something where we'd had to sit around and wait for something else to happen before we would be a fit.
When I first read about you, what I thought you were doing was replacing the entire trailer with a range trailer, but it's actually even more kind of retrofit than that. Like these companies,
Yep.
or the trucking company maintains the truck and the trailer. It's about kind of a retrofit kit on top of that trailer itself. Can you say more about that and how it actually works?
Yeah, it's a bolt-on solution, right? We know that people part of that is by necessity. Part of that is by design, right? We're a small company, right? We can't tackle and we can't boil the entire ocean. We can't build a new tractor and a new trailer and redesign the suspension and do all those things all by ourselves. So that means we need to work with what's already out there, right? And I think the great thing about the industry is that there's actually a decent amount of modularity built into how trailers are designed. And that means that we can swap an axle out, we can hang a battery pack off at the bottom of a trailer with relatively common interfaces, and just plug into things as they currently exist, whether that's a TRU that's built to plug into the grid to run off of electricity while it's at the dock, or just making sure that as we design our system, we don't require any special or non-traditional connections between the tractor and the trailer. So it really becomes a hitch up and go solution for the entire fleet.
Hmm. And you say that's partly because you're a small company and kind of redesigning all those things would be a massive undertaking. But isn't that also kind of what's beautiful about your solution is that you don't have as a your customers don't have to replace their trailers, they don't have to replace their trucks. We're talking about, I think your website said, like, in a few hours you can
Yep.
you can kind of install and retrofit existing trailers and trucks.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. It's an easier solution for customers to adopt because they can, it's plug and play or bolt on or however you want to phrase it to things that they already have. And I think the other comment I'd make is that there's this is an industry that has a pretty well established ecosystem that serves it, from trailers to tractors to TRUs to all sort dealers, right? And so because we're sort of playing nice, we're not trying to redesign or cut into someone else's business. I think that gives us that gives us the ability to more work with these participants and partners in a friendlier way, because we're saying, look, we're not trying to take eat your lunch. We're adding to it. Maybe we can actually enhance your capabilities. Maybe we can work together to get this out there and sell this into fleets. And I think that allows us to scale faster, get to more fleets faster, and more quickly build the trust that we need to in order to succeed in this industry.
Can you explain what it's actually doing? So the truck itself is the same. It's still a diesel powered truck, but it's getting kind of this electric assist. Is that the right way to think about it?
Yeah, so you can think of us as a energy storage system and an EV powertrain that get bolted onto a trailer. So we have anywhere from 2 to 300 kilowatt hours of battery, and we have a Class 8 e-axle. So this is a similar. It's basically an axle with an electric motor that's attached to it. It's a similar type of thing that you would see on like a Tesla Semi or a Freightliner e-Cascadia or something like that. Similar sort of class of durability, but we're putting on a trailer instead. And of course, there's sort of what we call our smart sensor suite that's installed all across these components that allow us to sense the motion of the tractor and the trailer and react to it and sort of act as a closed system on the trailer without relying on a data signal from the tractor. And so what this allows us to do is we have energy on board that we can power the e-axle with. We can use that energy to power a refrigeration unit, liftgate, any number of other accessories that you might have on a trailer. And then the e-axle provides propulsive assistance. And so if you imagine, these trailers are usually fully loaded, 60,000 plus pounds. A tractor that's pulling 60,000 plus pounds, that's going to be doing a lot of work, right? What our system does is it takes the perceived weight of that 60,000 pounds and turns it to zero. So all of a sudden, the tractor doesn't have to pull quite as hard, uses less fuel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But then I guess you still have the diesel engine there for, I don't know, and that, like, you're not dependent on the battery for your total range, and it's, I guess, a backup system, and it feels like it kind of solves some of the challenges that have made it hard to adopt like fully electric trucks like this.
Yeah, that's right. We're not the prime mover, and that means that we don't have to always, the battery pack can run out, and that's totally fine. We actually want people to use the battery pack, because a battery pack that you don't use all the way that's extra money, and that's extra weight that you're carrying around. And so I think that's kind of the nice thing about electrifying the trailer, is that as long as you have fuel in your tow vehicle and your tractor, whether that is battery fuel or diesel fuel or hydrogen or natural gas or whatever else, you're good to go, right? You're never stuck on the side of the road. But I think that also it sort of it also means that our technology is not just something that works today and reduces diesel costs and diesel emissions today. It's actually something that we're actually seeing early proof points that this really allows fleets that have made the investments in EV tractors to actually utilize them on longer routes and utilize them in more flexible applications, because now they have less range anxiety, right? We work with a fleet that usually ran their EV tractors on 60 to 70 mile routes. Like, these are like internal transfer routes, because they could not afford to, send have you ever seen a tow truck for a Class 8 tractor? It's like a really big thing. And, I don't know exactly how much it costs, but it's not cheap, right? And so that's the last thing you want to happen. You don't want to run out of juice and have to have a truck tow your truck. And so, after running pilot with us, they're like, hey, actually, we can do a 200-mile route with this. We can do a 220-mile route with this. We can actually go up to 280 miles. And now we're running real routes, real customer delivery routes that we use our normal diesel tractors on, that we probably never would have dared to run on electric. And now they can. And I think that sort of opens up their possibilities of, okay, maybe actually we can deploy electrified vehicles more broadly across the fleet if we have this technology on board. And it's something that allows them to kind of rethink the way they plan their routes, to rethink their fleet composition.
Okay, that's really interesting. It reminds me, another company we've talked to is Lightship, making the
Mhm.
the RV campers, and they have a very similar kind of angle in that, one of the challenges of adopting electric vehicles is the towing challenge. Electric trucks, consumer trucks, for they're essentially extending the range or negating the weight of an RV by electrifying it in a really similar way to what you're doing. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, got it. That makes a lot of sense. It kind of ties to my another question I was going to ask you is this kind of moral hazard question. Like, are we by doing something like this, are we making it? Are we just kind of extending the time during which we can continue making and putting new diesel trucks on the road because we have this kind of new method of making them lower emissions? And but actually, it sounds like this could be a way to sort of accelerate the transition to electric trucking as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really great question. We actually had like a pretty in-depth conversation about this exact question, or like about 2 years ago when we were about to decide that let's go after the Class 8 market. We had because all of us want to have impact, but I think there's a really strong streak of pragmatism that runs in this company because we've all done things that are pretty pie in the sky, and you have a longer time to true mass scale adoption, right? A lot of the teams worked on autonomy, worked on hydrogen powered airplanes, right? It's going to take a while for that technology to get adopted, and we kind of we're sort of of the mindset of like let's ship something that works today, that makes an impact now. And the reality is that it's going to be diesel's not going to go away, at least not for a while, right? We're it's going to be a part of our energy mix on the transportation side for the foreseeable future. And so let's not wait for the perfect solution to come along. Let's make a solution that works now, that works today, that can actually start to have an impact today, and you see where that takes us. And I think to your earlier point, I think the range extending capability of the technology, that's not something we're marketing, right? Because not very many people have EV tractors, but the people that do, they're discovering it for themselves. And I think that's the type of mindset shift that needs to happen for the industry to more quickly adopt the technology. It's not going to be because we tell them, hey, look, buy EV tractors and then hitch up one of our trailers to your EV tractor and it's going to be great. That's like two steps too far. They have to see it work on their existing technology. They have to see it work on the technology that they're considering deploying more widely and draw that conclusion for themselves. And then they can fully own that transition.
Yeah. And then how do your customers have to change their operations to adopt this?
Our goal is for this to be completely compatible with existing operations. We know that that's not 100% going to be the case, but one of the reasons at this point, I think we've spent over 100 days on customer pilots, and we're sort of I'm not sure how much time you spent out at truck yards, but they're like they come alive at night, right? So we're there at like 1 a.m., 2 a.m. That's when drivers come and they start their routes, and we're right there, right beside them to send them off because we want to see how they do their job. What are some of the things that we may think we know, but we don't actually know? We want to really truly observe and stand beside them as they do their job, because there's a lot of complexity and there's a lot of chaos that goes on at these yards, and we really have designed our system to be robust and flexible to adapt to the intricately managed chaos that happens, right? And so I think the biggest difference between what a trailer equipped with our system, what you need to do with it, and something that doesn't have our system is you got to plug it in, right, at some point. And we give people suggestions on where to plug it in and how to plug it in and when to plug it in to based on the typology of their operation. And so there's some folks that load right before they leave. There's some folks that load things early and they have something sitting in a lot for a little bit. And so we have different recommendations on each type of operation. And there's a lot of on the ground sort of explaining and habits that needs to be built in order for people to remember, hey, like I guess I got to plug it in. But they learn pretty quickly, and once they get a hang of it, it's not that much of a difference. But again, I think back to the earlier point, if you forget or you run out of chargers, or it's a busy night or whatever, right, and that 100% happens, I can't tell you how many times we've been told we're going to run a certain route with a certain driver, and then at the very last minute it changes, right? That things like that happen, right? And that's part of life. But at the end of the day, it's still a trailer, right? You can still hitch up, tow it. It's just a normal trailer at that point if there's no charge, or maybe we can pick up some charge along the way with regen braking and start to assist a little bit later on as the rep proceeds, right? But I think that's kind of how we're trying to make it compatible with things as they exist today, the true reality of these operations.
From a technology standpoint, I imagine a lot of this is, you're able to leverage things that already exist. You talked about the axle and the batteries. Is where in the system are you really innovating, or have you had to kind of tackle challenges that haven't been solved before?
Yeah. So, I mean, to my knowledge, no one's ever put a full on EV powertrain on a heavy duty trailer before. So that's kind of new, right? We do have a decent amount of IP around how you do that in a way that allows for field installability, that allows for compatibility with a wide range of trailer types and suspension types and TRUs and things like that. And so I would say that the high level point I'm trying to make here is that it's a pretty simple system that's pretty flexible, but simplicity is it's very complicated to design. And so there's a huge amount of work that teams put into thinking about the engineering design of the system to make it so easy to install and to operate. Of course, a lot of the secret sauce is in our controls and the smart sensor suite. We think it's a pretty important attribute of our system that we don't have to have a specialized connector between the tractor and the trailer, because that's another thing for people to think about. We have to interface with tractor OEM. We got to, train drivers on what plug goes where. And, there's lots of things that can go wrong. And, there's probably some functional safety concerns with that as well. And so what we try to do is we have a lot of sensors on board, and we take use of those sensors to really understand what is the driver trying to do. Where is the driver? Is the driver trying to change lanes? Are they trying to speed up? Are they trying to slow down? And just really help the driver do that in a more ready way. One of the things that we've heard from drivers, and this is probably overstating it a little bit, is that they're like, oh, it feels just like a normal car. Some of them is that it feels like a sports car, right? It accelerates faster, it slows down faster. You can get up to speed of traffic faster. I'm like, well, okay, that's probably exaggerating, but I think, compared to what they have today, right? Sort of standard trailers, I really do think it does feel like that because of the responsiveness of our control suite and also the power of our e-axle and battery pack system.
Mm-hmm. When you talk about the sensor suite, I think I saw somewhere on your website, maybe you talk about a smart kingpin, and that I hope you
Yeah.
can explain it to me. But my understanding is that's kind of the interface point between your trailer and the truck. So I'm picturing. Okay, maybe take over.
Yeah.
What?
No, it's initially that's exactly what we were doing, right? We were like, okay, well, how do we understand what the tractor's doing or what the tow vehicle's doing if we don't have a data connection? And we were like, oh, you know what? We do have a physical connection though. And, if we measure what's happening in that physical connection, we can have a pretty good approximation of what the driver is trying to do. Turns out that you can actually get that same information with a set of distributed sensors across the system. And so in addition to having some sensors in the Kingpin, we also have sensors everywhere else on the trailer. And over the course of a couple 100,000 miles, over the past year or so, we've actually been able to convince ourselves, like, actually, you know what? We don't need the Kingpin sensor at all, right? We actually we have pretty good fidelity of what's going on with just a bunch of other things spread across the trailer, and it's a lot faster and easier to install that way.
Interesting. Can you say more? Give more specifics about what are you sensing?
Yeah, we're sensing the movement of the tractor and the trailer, so things like acceleration and speed and stuff like that. And it's kind of, yeah. I'm trying to think of like an elegant way to explain it without giving away too many details. But just think about like your normal kinematic equations and how you can characterize different things using those signals.
But it's all your drivetrain is all responding to the forces that are being imparted on the trailer by the truck. So
Correct. Yep.
It kind of responds to the intent of the driver in that way.
Yep. I'll also say that we also can respond to the environment a little bit as well. And so we in early February we took one of our systems up to northern Michigan and did some winter testing. So snow and ice, cold temperatures, adverse conditions, things like that. And one of the reasons we did that is, we actually have trailer traction control now on our system. And so that understands like, what kind of surface are you driving on and how should you react to that based on what you're seeing and so there's a little bit of that too. So it's basically what's the environment doing, what's the tow vehicle doing, what's our system doing, and are those all appropriately relating to each other in the right way?
Yeah, cool. And where are you in the product development process?
So we're sort of deep in the pilot phase. So advanced pilot deployments with our production representative units right now with major fleets. I think we've done, I don't know, 70, 80,000 miles so far in customer operations, collecting real world data and real world learnings about how these things function, how these things are being used by fleets, so we can continuously update our algorithms and sort of make fine tweaks to it. We're going to be going into production relatively soon. First customer deliveries are happening, maybe later this year, right? So pretty soon, and going into production next year, sort of scaled production next year. So it's really exciting. We feel like we're like right at that cusp where people are starting to hear about it and starting to understand the potential for the technology. So I think the next year is going to be pretty big for us.
And what do you think's motivating your customers most? Is it about, is there some kind of sustainability goal or regulation they're trying to meet in terms of emissions, or is it more about cost savings or something like that?
I'll sort of put it this way: the regulatory environment these days is confusing and unclear. But I think there seems to be a general trend towards, hey, we gotta think about what kind of energy is powering our transportation system, right? And I think the trend is to lower emission sources. And so I think people see that, and whatever happens in the near term is kind of like, well, we still got to shoot for like the 5 year, 10 year out goal now. Otherwise, we're never going to get there whenever things snap back. But I think cost savings I mean, that's something that you can feel today, right? And so that's how we market our product, is something that can save a California reefer fleet $25,000 a year. That's real money, right? And so there's probably a bit of a sustainability angle, but I think the thing that drives it home is it's sustainability that actually pays for itself pretty quickly, and also kind of a hedge against rising fuel costs, right? We don't really know what's going on with fuel costs. We can't really control it. Electricity costs seem to be a little bit more well managed, and so this is something that I guess the other benefit is that as I mentioned earlier, drivers really like it, and I think there's a very well publicized driver shortage or the right driver retention challenge that fleets face. And so I think it's a combination of all these different factors that are leading the really progressive fleets that are trying to push the envelope, trial new technologies so they can bring it into their fleets and build out a longer term plan to really jump on board and incorporate this as part of their solution.
Hmm. And what's the business model? You're selling hardware, or you're selling equipment, or is there some kind of service model?
Yeah, no, we're selling hardware, right? Like certainly there are some conversations we're having around like, are there services that we want to add on? But we view ourselves as a company that builds hardware. We're a bunch of hardware engineers, right? And so let's make the hardware work. Let's ship it. We're selling into a market that is very hardware focused, right? I think software is relatively new to the trucking market. And so we're selling hardware that works, that's robust, that stands up to the rigors of commercial trucking. And we add additional intelligence on top of that.
How do the customers look at the payback period? You're talking about cost savings. How long does it take to reach that?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on how you run it, right? What your utilization rate is, what kind of, what your drive cycle is. But typically we're seeing somewhere in the 3 to 5 year range, probably on the higher end of that range for most fleets, but that's creeping down, right? We're trying to bring it as close to three years as possible, maybe even below that, right? But 3 to 5 years is sort of where we're at today, which we feel is pretty good for this type of technology and for something that is ready now.
Hmm. You mentioned refrigeration earlier, and kind of electric refrigeration. Is that a big driver for customers? Like, is that going to be kind of sort of a killer app for this, or how do people look at that?
Yeah, I think refrigeration is that's certainly it's an early market for us, reefer fleets, because if you just think about cost savings, well, TRUs have another diesel engine on it, right? And that diesel engine we can basically just turn off entirely if you power it with our system. And so that gives you better payback. I think there's also, there's been, again, on and off again regulations pointing towards, reducing emissions from these refrigeration units. But also the fleets that run these types of operations, they tend to have pretty significant consumer exposure. And I think the general public would like their food chain, their food supply chain to be quieter, to be more sustainable and more efficient whenever possible. And cost savings, I think, are certainly important to consumers, right? Is that something that these companies are going to trickle down? I'm not sure, right? But it certainly helps.
Yeah, that reminds me of something that Paul from Remora had said, is that one of the forces, and this was several years or a couple of years ago, one of the forces kind of driving adoption of the onboard carbon capture was kind of companies higher up in the supply chain saying, hey, we're trying to reduce our scope 3 emissions, and sort of pushing that down to the trucking companies.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. That's kind of the nice thing about this is that with or without governments or regulatory action, I think the general public wants to see things get cleaner and more efficient. And I think a lot of those things are increasingly tied to lowering operating costs as well, right? So I think it's a win-win-win for really everybody. We just got to find solutions that are practical enough for industry to adopt. So we're not forcing them to do something that they don't want to do. We're forcing them to do all the things that they wanted to do anyway. And now everyone's happy.
You talked about this a little bit, but I'm curious how sort of the industry incumbents are looking at this. Like, and it sounds like it's more of a potential partner approach rather than them seeing you as a threat or competition. And I'm thinking people like Freightliner and Volvo and Peterbilt, like the big truck manufacturers. How do they look at what you're doing?
Yeah, I think when we first came on the scene, they were like, what is this? What are you? I don't know what this is. Now that we've had some success with some mutual customers, they're like, "Oh, maybe we should pay attention. This is kind of interesting." And especially since we're trying to be friendly rather than scary or competitive, I think that's really helping the relationships. And so over the past several months, I think we have had a lot warmer uptake from the other side of the table. And I think a really good example of that is our partnership with Thermo King, right? They're the number one player in the refrigeration unit market. And we've been working with them for a bit over a year now, first focusing on technical collaboration and joint pilots. And now we're looking at ways that we can leverage their distribution and sales network to actually get this thing out more broadly, and to make sure that the fleets that purchase this equipment actually have a place to service it when the time comes. So I think that's a really good example of what we're seeing, and I think that trend should continue.
Yeah, looking into the future even more, what is your kind of outlook for the company, or what are your long-term goals? Like, what do you think? What kind of impact can Range have on this industry?
You mentioned 3 million tractors out on the market today. There are even more trailers. There's 3.5 million trailers just in the United States, right? It's going to take a really long time for us to get our systems on all of those trailers, not to mention the 300,000 trailers that get built and sold every year, right? So it's a huge market. We want to make sure we nail this use case and really start making an impact here. But I think you're seeing lots of other places where similar technology is creating impact and is viable. And I think we're looking at other markets as well. But let's make impact where there's impact to be made first, and then we can figure out how to scale it.
Is there a path where you start integrating your technology into new trailers, like some of
Yeah,
those
I think so.
300,000 that are produced every year?
Yeah, I think these are some of the OEM partnerships that we're actively looking into, right? I think it's both a bolt on, but if you can bolt it on and do it on a retrofit basis, you can absolutely do it at the end of a manufacturing line. So that's why we designed it that way.
And then maybe this is looking even further out, but do you think there's a world where we've just fully electrified our trucking fleet? Like, is that ever feasible in the way you see it?
That's a tough question. I think this is the question that's like the multi-million dollar question. This is the question that fleets have been grappling with for the past, at least a decade, right? Is it just going to be cleaner diesel? Is it going to be natural gas? Is it hydrogen? Is it battery electric? We don't really know, right? I think the cool thing about electrifying the trailer is that it's a modular solution, right? And it's a modular solution, and trailers sit around a lot more frequently than tractors, and so you can actually charge them a lot more easily because there's more dwell time, so you can actually take use of opportunity charging. And it does we're agnostic to the tow vehicle fuel source, right? And so we're a range extension for whatever is out there. So there may be a case where maybe we do sort of lop off the long range fuel types on the tractor side, and if you want to go long range, you just hitch it up to an electrified trailer. I'm not quite sure, but what I do know is that there needs to be more tools than there are today, to allow fleets to electrify their operations or decarbonize their operations in a way that works for them. If there's one thing that I've learned is that every fleet is different. You kind of think they're the same because from a distance they look similar, but when you get down onto the ground, you're like, wow, this is you completely you it's not the same, right? And so we got to give the industry a more diverse set of tools in order to do what they need to do, while also continue to operate their businesses without disruption.
Okay, I have three questions that I ask everybody at the end of every episode. The first is, how optimistic or pessimistic are you about the future of the planet, and why?
I would say that I'm optimistic, right? I'm a realist, but I'm an optimistic realist. I think that there's a lot of energy going on, with people wanting to make impact in this way. I think that's certainly true of sort of the younger generation. People are really attuned to the needs of the planet and the climate, and that's amazing, right? I think that's really cool. People care, and if people care, then they're more likely to take action. So I think that makes me feel optimistic. There's a lot of challenges out there, but I think there are a lot of people trying to tackle those challenges in meaningful ways.
Who's another company or individual doing something to address climate change that's inspiring you?
Ooh, that's a great question. Like, I feel like I'm so heads down doing what I'm doing now. I'm like, I don't know what else is happening. I think Remore is really cool. It's a really cool solution. I don't know too much about their technology, but I think the approach that they're taking is, to bolt something onto something that exists isn't too far afield from what we're trying to do here. And for my previous life, of course, I do track the hydrogen aviation space quite a bit. I think it's great that ZeroAvia continues to make progress. Someone's got to be out there to sort of push that technology forward, especially since Boeing and Airbus, they're large companies that move slowly. So I admire the innovators that are working within larger industries where they're very powerful incumbents. But they're just kind of like, hey, could you go faster? Could you try something a little bit different? Could you work a little harder? Because that's what we're doing. So I think those are a couple of companies. There are like dozens more that I just I haven't looked at specifically, but I just think it's great that there's that energy and drive and really the grit that's needed in order to stay the course, because these are long cycle businesses, right? Things don't change overnight. Hardware it's not software, right? Like you can't flash a software update and like automatically change what the world looks like. So it will take time to build physical things and get them out into the physical world. But I think ultimately these are the things that stay with us and are going to be around for a long time. So I really respect the folks that are working on hardware, as it pertains to sort of reducing emissions.
What's your take on the future of the aviation industry? Do you think hydrogen is the path? Like that's where it's headed, or sustainable aviation fuel, or electrification?
I'm hugely biased. I don't know in which direction I'm biased, but yeah, I think that it probably is going to be a multi-fuel solution because there are like the energy needs of different aircraft types and different rep profiles is so vastly different. I think short range makes a ton of sense to do electric, right? Longer range, does electric work? I don't know. Like maybe if battery energy density gets to a really good place, it's possible, right? It's hard to foresee right now, but maybe at some point. And then in terms of longer distance aviation, right? I obviously have a bias towards hydrogen. I understand why that's difficult though, right? I think SAF is great because you don't have to change too much of the hardware, but is that truly sustainable from an economics perspective? I don't know. But I think the great thing is that there are a lot of people out there that are trying a lot of different things. And, the market will decide, right? The market will ultimately decide what we need to do. And hopefully there aren't too many people putting their fingers on the scale in inappropriate ways, that we actually allow the market to get where it needs to get.
We should do another episode on that. Very curious. Last question. What advice do you have for someone not working in climate today who wants to do something to help?
Well, I mean, you got to think about, well, what can you contribute, right? Like I said earlier, right? I didn't start out being like, hey, I got to work on something that makes climate better, addresses climate challenges. I just did things that I thought were interesting and cool, and found that I happened to be pretty good at working on early stage challenges and coming up with novel solutions and working with teams of people that were also really passionate. And so think about what you can do, what you can bring to a team, to a problem where your passions lie. And I think that's a great way to focus, right? Because climate tech, it's such a broad space, right? You can literally do anything and have it have an impact. And so it's a matter of finding what's the right intersection of your passions and an overall driving need that society has.
All right. That was really fun. Jason, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for the questions. It's a great conversation.
Hardware to Save a Planet is brought to you by Synapse. To find out more about us and how we develop hardware solutions for the world's most ambitious companies, head to synapse.com. And then make sure to search for Hardware to Save a Planet in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you like to listen. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Synapse, thanks for listening.